You think no contact ends the story. It doesn't. Not when both people are emotionally disconnected in different ways. That is usually where the real story begins. Because silence is never just silence. It talks. It echoes. It fills the room with things neither of you said when you still had the chance. One person feels relief and calls it peace. The other feels panic and calls it love. But here is the twist. Both of them are now trapped inside the same invisible space, a place where memory starts bending, where emotions come back wearing new faces, and where the relationship keeps going long after the messages stop. Stay with me, because this is where most people misunderstand what no contact really does. It does not create emptiness. It creates pressure inside the mind. It turns memory into a stage. It turns absence into meaning. And if this hits something deep in you, ask yourself one hard question before going further. Are you truly missing that person, or are you missing the version of yourself that only appeared when you were with them? Because those are two very different losses. And if you can see that difference clearly, the whole situation starts to change. What looks like heartbreak may actually be identity shock. What looks like detachment may actually be delayed feeling. And what looks finished on the outside may only just be waking up on the inside. So before you assume silence means the bond is gone, watch closely. The next part explains why distance can make a connection feel stronger, stranger, and more powerful than it ever felt in real time. Avoidant attachment does not mean a person feels nothing. It means their inner system learned very early that too much closeness can feel heavy, unsafe, or hard to control. So when love gets deeper, when expectations grow, when emotional intensity starts rising, something inside them does not relax. It tightens. On the outside, they may look calm, logical, even cold. They may seem like they moved on too fast, but inside, it is often not emptiness. It is compression. Feeling gets packed away, pushed down, delayed, and stored somewhere out of reach so they can keep functioning without losing control. This is why so many people misread avoidant behavior. They think distance means the bond was weak. They think silence means there was no real attachment. But often the opposite is true. The attachment can be strong, sometimes very strong, but it is managed through space, not expression, through silence, not confession, through retreat, not openness. And when closeness starts to feel like pressure, even if the other person did nothing clearly wrong, the avoidant nervous system can treat that closeness like a threat to freedom. Not because love is bad, but because dependency feels dangerous. So they pull back, they create room, they detach in the moment because distance feels easier than emotional overload. And here is the part people miss. That distance is not always a final truth. Sometimes it is just the first defense. Sometimes the feeling is still there, only moved to a later timeline. If you have ever wondered why someone could act so unaffected and then seem haunted much later, this is why. Their emotions did not vanish. They were postponed. When no contact begins, the avoidant person often feels the first wave as relief, not joy, not deep freedom, relief. The calls stop, the tension stops, the emotional demand disappears, the pressure drops. Their nervous system finally leaves that state of constant activation, and the quiet feels almost clean, almost sharp, like stepping out of a crowded room into cold night air. And in that moment, they may honestly believe they are fine. They may tell themselves the relationship was not that deep, that it was too much. That distance proves they were right to pull away. But that first calm is often misunderstood, even by them. It is not closure. It is deactivation. It is the body settling because the trigger is no longer in front of it. That is very different from processing the relationship. Very different from understanding what was felt. Very different from truly letting go. And this matters because the mind loves to label early relief as final truth. It says, "See, I'm okay now. See, it meant less than I thought. See, I don't need this." But later, when distractions fade and the outside noise gets quieter, what was pushed aside begins to return in broken pieces. Not always as obvious sadness, not always as clear longing, more often as small, strange moments. A pause, a memory that shows up out of nowhere, a heavy feeling with no clear name, a thought that lingers longer than it should. Watch this closely, because this is where the delayed part begins. What looked finished starts moving again. What felt solved starts opening from the inside. For the person who was more emotionally open, more attached, or more used to the connection as a source of comfort, no contact feels very different. It does not feel like relief. It feels like withdrawal. The body notices it first. The rhythm changes. The routine breaks. The emotional system keeps reaching for something that is no longer there, like a hand moving in the dark toward a switch that has been removed from the wall. This is why silence can feel so loud. The connection had become part of regulation, not in a weak way, not in a shameful way, just in a deeply human way. You got used to the presence, the pattern, the emotional return. And when that disappears without replacement, the mind does what it always does when it cannot complete something outside itself. It starts trying to finish it inside. Thoughts loop, conversations replay, old messages gain new meaning. You revisit moments that once felt normal, and now they feel loaded, almost sacred, almost painful. This is not just overthinking. It is the mind trying to repair continuity, trying to close the circuit, trying to make emotional sense of a break it did not choose or did not fully understand. And if you are still listening, this next truth matters. In this phase, you are often not only missing the person, you are reacting to the disruption their absence created inside your inner world. The nervous system hates unfinished patterns, so it keeps searching, it keeps scanning, it keeps asking the same question in different forms. What happened? What changed? What did it mean? Could it come back? That is how silence becomes obsession, not because love is always deeper, but because uncertainty is harder for the mind to release than pain. No contact does something dangerous and fascinating at the same time. It removes the external reality that kept both people grounded. Once there is no new conversation, no fresh conflict, no updated truth, the mind has to work with old material only. Fragments, tones, moments, half-finished emotions. And from those pieces, it starts building a private version of the relationship. This is where projection begins. The avoidant mind often starts reducing the emotional weight of the bond. It rewrites intensity into something smaller, softer, easier to carry. It tells a story that protects distance. It says it was not that serious. It says the closeness was too much. It says space is proof the connection was limited. On the other side, the more attached mind moves in the opposite direction. It adds weight. It enlarges details. It turns small signals into big symbols. It gives ordinary moments a deeper glow. It looks back and sees signs, hidden meanings, missed chances, almost endings that now feel huge. Both minds are editing. Both minds are protecting themselves. One reduces meaning to stay safe. The other increases meaning to stay connected. That is why silence is so deceptive. It does not show the truth. It gives both people room to create a version of the truth that feels emotionally useful. And once that happens for long enough, the real relationship begins to fade behind the inner one. You are no longer relating to the person as they were. You are relating to the image of them that your emotional state now prefers. That is why some absences grow larger in the mind than the real relationship ever was in daily life. No contradiction is left to correct the fantasy. Over time, memory stops acting like a record and starts acting like a regulator. It no longer asks what exactly happened. It asks, what version of the past helps me survive this feeling right now? And that shift changes everything. The avoidant may remember the connection in a way that lowers pressure, lowers emotional responsibility, lowers the sense of need. The more attached person may remember it in a way that keeps the bond alive, keeps hope breathing, keeps the emotional thread from snapping completely. Neither version is fully false, but neither is fully balanced. The real relationship was probably mixed, layered, contradictory, human. It had closeness and confusion, warmth and misreading, desire and defense. But silence hates complexity. Silence turns people into symbols. It turns the past into selected scenes. It removes friction, then lets imagination polish the memory until it shines in a way it never did while it was actually happening. This is why distance can make someone feel more important, not less. Reality is messy, absence is clean, and the mind often prefers a clean pain over a messy truth. So it edits, it simplifies, it dramatizes, it protects itself through narrative. If that makes sense to you, then keep going, because the next layer is even deeper. After enough time passes, both people may become more attached to the internal version of the relationship than to the real one they lived. That is when the bond stops being external and becomes psychological. It continues, but only in private, only in imagination, only in the repeated movie each mind plays when the room is quiet and no one is there to interrupt it. For the avoidant, the delayed return of feeling can be deeply confusing. In the beginning, there was calm, space, distance, a sense of control. But later, sometimes much later, subtle emotions begin to rise from underneath the surface. Not always in a dramatic way. Often in a quiet, inconvenient way. A certain place brings back a feeling they cannot name. A random hour of the night feels strangely heavy. A thought of the person appears during some normal task and stays longer than expected. A small wave of nostalgia hits, but it comes mixed with resistance, mixed with mental explanations, mixed with the urge to push it away before it fully forms. This is important because avoidant processing usually does not welcome emotion directly. It filters it, thinks around it, rationalizes it, breaks it into safer pieces. So when the feelings return, they may not arrive as, "I miss them." They may arrive as irritation, as restlessness, as unexplained pause, as the sudden sense that something unfinished is still alive in the background. And because this return does not match the earlier relief, it creates inner conflict. The mind says, "I thought I was over this." The body says, "Maybe not." The person says, "This makes no sense." But it does make sense. The first phase was survival. The second phase is delayed contact with what was postponed, not all at once, not in a clean line, but enough to disturb the story of indifference. This is why some people only feel the depth of a bond after the bond is already gone. Not because the bond became deeper in absence, but because only in absence did their defenses stop working at full strength. For the more attached person, the opposite pattern keeps unfolding. The absence does not usually shrink the bond at first. It enlarges it. The mind becomes busy, extremely busy. It keeps trying to finish the relationship through thought because it cannot finish it through contact. You replay the last conversations. You study the tone of simple moments. You go back to things you ignored before, and now they look like clues. The smallest detail can suddenly carry emotional weight far beyond what it had in real time. A pause becomes a message. A look becomes a symbol. A memory becomes evidence. This is not because you are weak. It is because the emotional system is trying to restore order to something that broke without a clean ending. And the body joins in too. Restlessness, trouble focusing, that quiet but constant sense of scanning for resolution. It is like your whole inner world keeps listening for a sound that never comes. And here is the hard truth. After a while, the pain is no longer only about the person. It becomes about the structure that collapsed inside you when they left. Their absence exposes how much emotional balance was tied to their presence. So what hurts is not just losing them, it is losing the version of daily life that existed around them, losing the emotional rhythm, losing the future image, losing the familiar inner position you occupied in relation to them. If you have felt that, do not click away from this part. This is where healing actually begins. Because once you see that some of your suffering is about internal disorganization, not only romantic loss, you stop chasing only them and start understanding yourself. And that changes the direction of the whole journey. When no contact lasts long enough, both people enter something deeper than memory. They enter confrontation with themselves. The relationship used to carry certain hidden patterns for both of them. It held old fears, old needs, old wounds, old defenses. While the relationship was active, those patterns were projected outward. One blamed the pressure, the other blamed the distance. One chased, the other withdrew. One asked for clarity, the other escaped intensity. But once contact stops, distraction fades. The other person is no longer there to hold the projection, and what remains is harder to avoid. Internal material rises. For the avoidant, this can mean finally facing vulnerability that was always pushed aside. Not as a dramatic breakdown, more like a quiet discomfort with their own emotional limits. They start noticing how quickly they reduce closeness, how fast they protect autonomy, how often they call something too much, when what they really mean is too close to something I don't know how to handle. For the more attached person, the shadow may appear as dependency awareness. They begin to see how much of their emotional stability depended on being seen, chosen, answered, and emotionally met by the other. That can feel painful, it can feel exposing, but it is also honest. And honesty is where repetition finally has a chance to stop. Because as long as both people keep believing all discomfort comes only from the other person, they stay trapped in the same cycle. They keep searching outside for what is being activated inside. They keep calling it fate, chemistry, or unfinished love, when part of it is actually unfinished self-understanding. That is the deeper mirror no contact forces open. This is why longing can be so misleading. What feels like missing them can sometimes be your own unprocessed emotional material coming back into view. The avoidant may think, maybe I miss that person, when part of what they are really meeting is the pain of their own distance, the weight of feelings they never let themselves feel in time. The cost of always stepping back before intimacy becomes real enough to change them. The more attached person may think, I need them back to feel whole, when part of what they are really meeting is the fear of being with themselves without external emotional reassurance, without someone else stabilizing the inner storm. In both cases, the relationship did not create every wound. It exposed them. It gave them shape. It brought them to the surface, and once no contact begins, those same wounds can no longer hide inside daily interaction. They start asking for attention. They start asking for truth. This is where the path splits. One path leads to repetition. You keep blaming, chasing, fantasizing, minimizing, idealizing, and building stories that keep the bond alive in distorted form. The other path leads to awareness. You start asking different questions. Not how do I get them back? Not why did they do this? But what did this relationship activate in me? What pattern did it reveal? What fear did it expose? What belief about love, worth, closeness, or abandonment did it bring into the light? That shift is powerful, quiet but powerful, because the moment the focus returns to your own inner process, the relationship stops being only a mystery to solve and becomes a mirror to understand. And once that happens, the silence starts losing some of its power to control you. Real resolution does not usually arrive through one final talk, one perfect explanation, or one sudden moment of emotional clarity. It arrives much more quietly. It begins when the mind stops needing to keep the relationship active inside. As long as you are still replaying scenes, rewriting endings, imagining messages, correcting old conversations, or feeding internal arguments that never happened, the bond is still alive in a psychological sense. That is why closure is not always about receiving an answer. It is about no longer needing to keep asking the same question. For the avoidant, healing starts when feelings can exist without immediate escape, when sadness does not have to be turned into logic, when closeness in memory does not instantly trigger withdrawal, when they can admit, even privately, that distance was not always strength and that control was not the same thing as peace. For the more attached person, healing starts when longing is no longer the main lens, when memory becomes more balanced, when the person is seen as real, not idealized, when the relationship stops glowing with borrowed meaning and returns to its actual shape, flawed, beautiful, incomplete, human. This does not happen in one day. It happens through repetition in the opposite direction, less checking, less fantasizing, less emotional feeding of the inner movie, more presence, more honesty, more tolerance for the quiet after the storm. And yes, this part takes time. But time alone is not the healer. Awareness is. Time just gives awareness more chances to become stronger than the old loop. That is the turning point. Not when the memory disappears, but when it stops demanding a performance from your nervous system every time it appears. As that integration grows, the whole inner structure begins to change. The avoidant person slowly learns that feeling is not the same as drowning, that intimacy does not automatically erase the self, that memory can be touched without having to be minimized, explained away, or pushed into cold distance. The emotionally attached person slowly learns that connection is meaningful, but it cannot become the only container for identity, stability, or self-worth. That missing someone does not always mean they were meant to stay. That love can matter deeply and still not be right, not be mutual enough, or not be sustainable in the form it took. Both people begin, slowly, to stop talking to the inner version of each other so often. The imagined conversations lose energy, the dramatic replays become less convincing, the emotional charge starts separating from the memories themselves. The relationship no longer feels like a live wire running through the present. It starts feeling like something that truly happened, but is no longer happening now. And that difference is freedom. Not because the past is erased, not because the pain was fake, but because the psyche no longer treats the bond as unfinished business. It files it differently. It stops carrying it as an emergency. It starts holding it as part of personal history. If you have been waiting for a sign that you are healing, this may be it. You think of them and your body does not collapse into the old state. You remember what happened and the memory is still meaningful, but it is no longer in charge. You stop needing their return to justify your growth. You stop needing their regret to validate your pain. You stop needing the perfect ending to accept that the chapter existed. And in the end, that is what no contact was really doing beneath the surface. It was not just separating two people. It was separating reality from interpretation. Once interaction ended, the relationship moved inward. It became memory, projection, emotion, and unfinished meaning. One person reduced the importance to feel safe. The other increased the importance to feel connected. But both were responding to the same human struggle: how to regulate intensity when love touches old wounds. What looked like coldness was often delayed feeling. What looked like desperate missing was often a nervous system trying to find balance again. What looked like truth was often just a mind under pressure, creating a version of truth it could survive. But slowly, if you let the process mature instead of forcing it, something changes. The mind gets tired of running the same scene. The loops lose fuel. The imaginary conversations fade, not because every question got answered, but because your life stops feeding them. And then silence becomes something new. Not punishment, not proof, not a battlefield where you keep measuring who cared more. Just silence, plain, neutral, human. The relationship becomes a chapter that shaped you, not a force that still defines you. That is the real shift. Not victory, not revenge, not dramatic closure, integration. The place where memory no longer controls emotion and emotion no longer rewrites memory. The place where you can finally say, this happened, it mattered, it changed me, and it is no longer running my inner world. If you understood this deeply, then you already know the final truth. No contact does not always end love. Sometimes it ends illusion. And once illusion fades, what remains is not emptiness. It is clarity. Quiet, steady, honest clarity.